Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. This is Feroz Manji from Daraja Press. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be talking with Tariq Mehmood, who is the author of a very, very interesting book called The Second Coming. The cover, a picture of the St. George's, the English flag being burnt, some Union Jacks. This is clearly something set in the United Kingdom. So who is coming and who is the second one? So I'm very, very pleased to have my friend and colleague, Comrade Tariq Mehmood. Welcome to the show, Tariq.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back on the show, and especially as we are about to launch The Second Coming. So help us understand what gave rise to this book.
There's an interesting story and a sad part of it as well. I work in Beirut and I sort of live between England and Lebanon. And one of these sort of nice Beiruti nights, I went for a drink in an area of Beirut where a lot of NGO types used to go, and to meet a friend, a Turkish friend, who in character was late, not character of Turks, but his character. He was late. So I didn't know what to do. So I got myself a glass of red wine, and I was sitting and watching a load of people, very smartly dressed, youngish people, and talking in English accents, some mostly South, but I recognized them. So being sort of me, I decided to go introduce myself. And I said, look, until my friend comes, do you want company? They weren't particularly keen to see me. And they went quiet. So I just sat down and said, come on, who are you? What you doing here? Where you all from? They started telling me that that one of them said, well, I'm a journalist. I said, you don't look like a journalist, love. And the other one next to him said, well, I work for NGOs. I mean, these guys were fit, really fit. And I've seen soldiers when I've seen them, being the child of a soldier myself. And I said, what have you been doing? Oh, we've been going to this thing in Syria. This is at the time when just a bit after the American ambassador at one of the rallies in Syria for so-called democracy, as if the Americans ever bring. And then Syria was sinking into a sort of the civil war that it ended up in, or a war. And they started talking to me. They weren't hostile or anything. And I started laughing with them. I said, I know writers, they're almost always blind. They're definitely broke. Most of them, especially your age group, they'll have a pen and a paper. Look at you all, even you could kill me with your looks, And besides, have you got visas to go to Syria? Because they said no. I said, well, how are you going to Syria? You got no visa. You're going into a foreign country. You're supposed to be NGOs. You're clearly not NGOs. You're bullshitting me. So I laughed myself. None of them found it very funny. But by then, the Turk had arrived, and I went off and drank, and I kept thinking through the night, this is obscene in a way. They don't respect sovereignty. They don't respect any laws. They don't respect immigration. And this was a time when, the ISIS is beginning to rise, the fans of so-called religious violence are coming. I went to bed that night and I woke up the next day and I didn't know which war to follow. Ancestrally, I'm Kashmiri. There was a lot of things going wrong there. I've worked in Pakistan, Peshawar on the border. There was a war over there with the Anglo-American NATO occupation. There's a war in Palestine. Lebanon's always simmering. Israeli planes never give us a day without violating the sovereignty of the country. Now in Syria, which war shall I follow today? Honestly. And I thought this is so ridiculous. And there I am, due to go to Manchester and London the week after, or a month after, and it's all peaceful. So I'm going to a country engaged in this destruction here, engaged in death and destruction in Afghanistan, sold Kashmir in 1846, my ancestors, for £300,000, the legacy of which is still being fought over. And it's all zombie land. Nothing's happening. They don't care. It's like normalcy. Why can they be normal? And I don't know which war to follow. I don't know what's happening to my friends. I don't know all sorts of things. So I started imagining what would happen, if that scene comes to Britain. And so it didn't seem that unrealistic. So I talked to two other fellow headbanging writers, Melvin Burgess and Peter Carlu, and I said, look, lads, what do you think to this if we were to imagine the hell that we're sending overseas actually comes here? Because the chickens do come home to roost one day in different shapes and forms. So we started thinking, and from there it began to develop. Well, Israel is strong because America and Britain and the white countries like where you are, Canada, the settler colonies, they can afford to give unlimited resources to these people and overthrow governments they don't like, overthrow regimes, destroy countries. Well, what would happen as their power demises, as the new order is about to be born? It may not be the new order that I would like to see. I would like to see a just order, a free Asia, a free Africa, and in that process, we will free Europe and the white colonies, if you like, not without it. You can't have your freedom when we are butchered. You can't do it. It will never happen. And we began to sort of see that, Melvin started his thought process and ended up writing Three Bullets, that you live in a world where your mind is being rewritten by drones. And that was the bullets are a potential, as a journey for this character. And Peter wrote one called One Blood, that comes from an old saying, I have one drop of white blood in me, and that's the blood I worship, in a sense that they want to write the brains of black people to make them think they're white, in a sense. And mine then emerged as the second coming. So it's 1, 2, 3, the second coming, that this is the new Jesus. That these people who peddled religion to us actually don't really care. In the case of Israel, as you know, the founders who claimed that God gave them the land of Palestine didn't believe in God. It doesn't really matter, though. And in that setup, mine was, well, they're going to bring a Messiah. What would happen if the logic of the suppression of the rise of Islamophobia, rise of the far right, which is happening right in front of us, where could it all go to? Could they ban Islam? I think so. Could they intern Muslims? Could this country then simply walk away? Okay, we're going to do this. No, I don't think so. I think the resistance would be so much. What forms and shapes would it take? Now, in this chaos, people will still love. People will still want justice. So a piece of fiction is a story about human beings. It's about life. It's about love. It's about all the little things that make us people. It's about holding on to our memory because we refuse to be rewritten. And very often when there's mass displacement, the way women suffer and the way men suffer is different. I can even give you a small example of the terrible suffering in Lebanon just now, in a way that's not in this novel, but I wish I'd put something like it in. I didn't know. When the Israelis started bombing large parts of South Beirut, and hundreds of thousands of people, there's 1.3 million now, started moving out of their homes, out of their villages which have been there for thousands of years or no more. And there were the beautiful Corniche of Beirut. It was like a tent city. There were just people standing everywhere. And two things that terrified me when I saw this. The drones were there, the bombs we could hear, the air smelt of explosives. You could see all that. The death was all around. But I saw babies, Feroz, in mothers' arms. They weren't crying. They were just looking at you, just not crying. Not one, not two, not three. It's really frightening when they just look at you and you don't know what to say. There's no language. There's nothing you can say. And the next thing, which it never occurred to me, a lot of women were just standing. I didn't know make of it. And we were collecting clothes and things at the time. And one of the friends told me, I said, look, they're just standing there. They said, well, they can't relieve themselves until there's darkness and they can have some dignity. So these women were standing around, not being able to have a piss. Anyway, so these were sorts of, I didn't put it in the book, but it's true. So the stories then moved, but even then I didn't come across this particular incident. So the story of mine then moved, well, what would happen if a far-right Christian militia takes over London? What would happen? What would they do? So in a fictional world, you always go beyond the imprisonment of reality. Otherwise, there's no point in writing fiction. And that's where, we came out with these ideas. The other two did two beautiful books. Mine took a very long time, and partly because of me and partly because just the situation. And as the book was being written, this is about a young woman who has her love, who wants to be, get somewhere in a medical school. She has dreams. And she's kidnapped by the militias. And this was round about the time when my own daughter went into hospital suffering from trauma, into a mental hospital. And each hospital she went to, even in that hospital, she had to endure racist violence and sexual harassment in some of them. A mentally traumatized young woman. So when I was writing the story, I couldn't get my character out of the hospital. And one day, Peter and Melvin took me out to the pub, which is not unusual, by the way. We're always going out. And he said, one of them said, I think it was Peter, the reason you can't get your character out of the hospital is because you can't get your daughter out of hospital. You've become locked into this world where the reality of war, the reality of domestic situation, and my own historical background as well, they all sort of connected. And now it was true. The more I realized that I couldn't get her out is because I'm stuck. So there are inner voices, and she was dealing with inner voices, because memory is what holds us all together, what makes us human, what creates the character, what gives it the three-dimensionality and the flaws. And this is also a tool in the hands of modern day, of the software systems, of our environment, the social media, what we're doing right now, in a way, holding on and recording that memory, even if it be fictional. Now, this is also a highly poetic book, because at the time of writing the book, I was also working on a book called The Lines of Fire. And I have been reading, this is about the poetry of the Afro-Asian writers movement. And that book wasn't finishing either. One, because I just kept on reading poem after poem after poem, and they seep in to this book. There's a character who's the mother. She might as well be me, but she's not really me. I'm not a woman. Well, I don't think so anyway. And she is in there, and the poetry is in there from that Afro-Asian movement going back into history of colonialism and how people used poetry as a crutch, both of survival and as also a weapon of resistance. So I sort of jumbled all these things together. And of course, when you write fiction, you're in the character. And because the character is young, and it's a young woman, there's a lot of stuff in there about women. I just couldn't get it together. I didn't know what to do. So I was so lucky. I had so many women. Some really told me off, you can't do this and you can't do that. I had great help from trauma psychologists. I had help from young women, students who would read it. There are little things when you write, you don't do certain things to make it. So there's an awful lot in there. which has become refined by the assistance of many, many people over
Mhm.
time, including right up to the last minute. I have two young women refining it right until the last minute.
If I might just sort of quote from the back cover, in the remnants of a fractured UK, England is on the brink of collapse. America's reign as a superpower has crumbled, and far right militias are rising to power with Islamophobia and English nationalism as their rallying cries. Brutal violence ensues. 19-year-old Marah Sultana is thrust into a battle for survival. Hunted by mercenaries, she carries a secret powerful enough to change the course of the war and the future of the world. I think many people reading this book, well, this is picking up from where The Handmaid's Tale, Clockwork Orange, and so on. To what extent were you influenced by that?
Well, I've obviously, over the years, I have read those. It's when the journalist pointed this out to me, is the first time it occurred to me that, oh gosh, I'm following in this sort of a tradition. I suppose in one sense it is, I didn't like Clockwork Orange, if that's any consolation, if I
Mm.
despised it, but that's another story altogether. But, that is the dystopia world. But all dystopian worlds don't have to be such fundamental alternative worlds. They could just, as Melvin would put it, sideways, where most of the rules of the world that we're going to create are still the same, but some are fundamentally different. Perhaps an animal can talk, but all of the rules are the same. Perhaps, and so in this sense, it's in that sort of way, and very much I was really trying to engage and evolve. This writing a novel is a process, really. It evolves, it changes all the time, especially when people like you and editors get involved. It takes another gear altogether, and look at how much work we did just to get it right, and it's still having to go through its birth pangs.
I wanted to get back to your earlier statement about chickens coming home to roost, because it does strike me in rereading the novel that what has happened in Palestine and in Beirut and Lebanon, southern Lebanon in particular, are in a sense future mirrors for the rest of us who live in the global north.
I think it's true. When I sit over here, I'm in Manchester at the moment. If you fall ill with a heart problem, you'll probably die before a doctor sees you. The infrastructure is gone. Yet bombs are flowing from here to Israel and then on to Lebanon and Palestine. We can't get enough ambulances to run on the roads here. Yet British Royal Air Force is flying intelligence flights for the Israelis 24/7 so they can continue to bomb and do whatever the genocide that they're doing in Lebanon and Palestine. So in a sense, if that is not umbilically connected, it's a little bit if your neighbor's house falls and you live in a semi-detached, do you seriously think you're going to survive forever? If the house next door is hungry, which my mom used to tell me when I was young, you can't fill yourself at home and have your neighbors hungry. It can't be done. That hunger will reach you one way or another. And in that sense, I think, that we are destined in the West to go down into the broken, leftover, degenerate configurations of the past where the arrogant forces, whoever they may be, whether it be the Roman Empire or empires before or after them, they all will go. And now, the speed with which the West is going, you seriously believe that Britain and Canada and America and all these other rich countries, you really think you can display our genocide across in Palestine and in Lebanon and the people there and let people watch these burning houses and demolishing buildings, and nothing will happen to you. The very forces that you are allowing to do this are the very forces which will do the same to you. It's only a matter of time. And now it doesn't matter. So, in a way, that's what the fictional world does give you an advantage. It gives you a mirror, though to the extremes. It's a bit like, when we go put in microscopes, to see what's going on inside a particular thing. You can't just look at it with a small magnification. You have to magnify it. You see the creepy crawlies right underneath. Now, we don't have to go that far anymore. In this book, I didn't have to go very far. Really, I saw the writing, the opening lines. For those who are writers, incidentally, the opening lines were written just before it got to you, the last paragraph, because it was some of the young readers that said these are missing, and that's how they came in. But I've seen them. I've seen everything I've said. In fact, I've witnessed most of what has happened in the book in one way, shape, or form. So we don't have to worry about the beginning until we get to the end. And in novels, the end can be the beginning, or it can be the beginning of something else.
One of the things that struck me is that you were very deeply involved in the rising resistance movements, if one could use that term, in the UK, organising in Bradford, organising in Northern England, and the rise of that kind of resistance from within amongst the children of the colonized who were living in the UK. What I felt wasn't necessarily developed was what was the form of resistance that was going to be emerging in this dystopian reality. What organizing was going on? One gets glimpses of subliminal organizing. You get somebody coming out who finds out you eventually that he's part of that armed resistance and so on. But we don't get a sense of this massive organizing, except for and I think you're quite critical about the was it called the English Socialist League?
ESLA, English Socialist Liberation Army.
Yes. So tell us about resistance and what were you trying to get across there?
Okay, first point really, Firoz, is that when writing fiction, you're telling a story of people and not a story of a movement, if you like. So people interact with movements, and movements change because what people do or they do to people. So it wasn't Gorky's mother, which is fundamentally about something that is, intrinsically part of a party, part of a movement. So when I was growing up, I was very closely supportive of the Irish struggle. And in Ireland, if you know, there was the IRSP, Irish Republican Socialist Party. And then there was, of course, Sinn Féin, there was the IRA, there was INLA. So I'm familiar with all those. But also during the colonial period of the anti-apartheid struggles in Zimbabwe with ZAPU and ZANLA and ZIPRA and all these organizations that were evolved, they were all in England as well. They were collecting funds. They were holding meetings. We were going to those meetings, and we were raising funds. We were raising the political profile. So the movements were not isolated, and we were living in those moments. And in those days, I was bouncing around from London, Birmingham, Bradford, all over England. And we were fighting the beginnings of the rise of the far right at the time. But more importantly, the far right was a small section of the fight. It was actually the British state. The far right wasn't the one that ran the police, the army, the media, the housing, the education. Ours was a comprehensive. We were screwed up at school. We were beaten up in the playgrounds. The teachers were giving us an education that didn't make sense. I was being forced to learn English when I spoke it. I had to get my uncle to go to the school to tell them why is he having to learn English when I was interpreting for my uncle. It was an absurd situation in our lives being bust out. So there was a whole sort of a systemic thing in that. the story of how the resistance, I think perhaps depending on how the book goes, I may actually do part two. I've been already friends are saying, those who read the drafts are saying, come on, you've got to do it. I said, I can't do it anymore. I don't look anything close to a 20-year-old woman. I'd have to do something else. I'm too old. And it doesn't seem right, to be doing this. But, there's always ways around it. So the movements that are here, there is a monster in our midst in the world. I think the implications of its rise are not being taken seriously, and it's England. In these islands, there is an English question. That's why you had the English Defence League. That's why you have lots of other forces emerging. That's why they have their own flag. Historically, of course, but they also, another question. Scotland has something, a Scottish Parliament. Wales has it. Even the colony of Northern Ireland has something. What about England? Sometimes the English ask. Well, you've got Westminster, but we've got, no, but that's British. All right. So what's the problem here? England cannot ask for independence. From whom? You're the one people took independence from. Now we have a problem in this contradiction. England is the largest of the nations. It's the one that runs these islands and has invaded and occupied the globe with others as its junior partners. What happens when this alliance and enforced marriage of Britain breaks? And it's not going to be there forever. Scotland came close if they hadn't bribed and cajoled them. Ireland is a done deal. It's only a matter of time. It's just even the loyalists can see the writing. They're a minority now in Northern Ireland. So what will happen? If English nationalism rises, can it ever be progressive? As you know, you're a young man yourself, that nationalism can have a progressive role, but historically will end up in a reactionary position, a backward position. But depending on who it's fighting, it can have a progressive element to it, to its anti-colonial, anti-imperial setups. But what if the nation is imperialist? How does it get rid of Englishness? This is the problem also for white people. The problem for white people isn't the color of their skin, because they're not white. The problem for them is whiteness, the power of whiteness, the power of England, the power of Germany, and so on. So here lies a contradiction which I was also trying to look at. Can they be our friends? Well, potentially, yes, because you can't write off a nation of 40, 45 million people. You can't do that. All 40, 45 million people are not fascists. And even if the dominant level becomes the far right, our stories will be one of annihilation, not less, because that's what they've done overseas. Why will they not do it here? Why? That's why they're comfortable with the genocide overseas. They've done it in America, they've done it in Africa, they've done it in Australia, they've done it all over. Why not here? And therefore, these are dire, dire warnings. And so that was my concern, to look at how could these things suddenly change? How could political movements can grow very fast and can become very strong? But when empires collapse, they don't leave a void. Something new comes into that space. New stories will come into that space. What will those stories be? The Americans may not be able to see the speed of their decline, but we can. We know they're angry. America is angry. Israel's anger is American anger, it's British anger. They can't run the world. At the same time as the chaos the West is creating, we have the BRICS rising. So that's what I was trying to do in this novel, to look at the human side of suffering. How will we overcome? What will we do if we are confronted in these situations? And I had some great fun, because when you write a novel, you can do what you like with your characters and change them, but they become very real. I can hear them in my head. I can laugh with them, cry with them, slap them. I can do the whole caboodle, and it's sometimes it's good fun as well.
You're listening to the Daraja Press podcast. Daraja is the Kiswahili word for bridge. As its name suggests, Daraja Press seeks to build bridges, especially bridges of solidarity between and amongst movements, intellectuals, and those engaged in struggles for a just world. Check out our other episodes, books, and more at darajapress.com. So now let's get back to the show. The question that Tom Nairn wrote about way back in the 70s about the breakup of Britain. And if being British is no longer a concept that can continue, what does it mean to be English? Is it necessarily bringing home their genocidal history on the national terrain? And if not, what are the possibilities? What are the alternatives? And I would like you also to come back to what I read as a criticism of the English National Socialist League that you portrayed, and how opportunism, which we've seen so many times in our movement, took over. So, I'd like you to try and address both those aspects.
Well, these are complex and very good questions. I'm not sure we'll answer all of those. But one of the reasons for the opportunism, war is not clean, it's dirty. It's never straightforward. There's always a subtext that we don't understand. The diplomats talk in a language doesn't make sense. Just look at the language around us, around the genocide. It's so bizarre that if you put it in fiction, it wouldn't make sense. Also, I've seen over the years, people don't take seriously the ideas about the battle of ideas, if you like. If an idea is lost as an idea, that we're human, we're equal, we bleed like you, we feel like you. Now, if you don't see that in us, you can't really see it in yourself. You've also lost that humanity. So in dealing with the opportunism, I think I was thinking back to Malcolm X, was it, who said, scratch a white man and you'll find a racist. And I found that over the years, because there's racism and racism. When we were growing up, we would forgive our working class mates. They might call you a packy or something like that here and there at work. But my God, when we had to fight on the streets, they stood with us, shoulder to shoulder, really, and took the hammerings from the police and the stabbings from the gangs and stuff. The middle classes, they just ran off. There was hardly ever a moment. So it was, if you have the power over us of ideas, of economics, of our stories, if you have that power, then you're going to do things for your own right. And I'd set it up, the last bastion of defense against the far right was in the south as well, because the north in this place has historically had issues anyway. It's very deprived, even now, it's a deprived compare. There isn't an equal development in the metropolis, let alone in its outer colonies. We will see, I believe, that this island, the quicker it breaks from my point of view, the better, though it'll be terrible for me, because the Scots will have a chance to breathe, the Welsh will have, and also the world may do as well. I have no love for a so-called United Kingdom, because it's not united in any way, shape, or form. It never has been. It's been held together by brute force and welded together by an historically evolved racism and everything it did to us. So that's now to come on to the positive side as well. I wouldn't be half a human being had it not been for old English teachers, white people, who taught me not all white people were the same. I didn't know. When I got slapped by one, I got beaten by another, I got chased by another. How would I know? I was a young boy. I honestly, like I've told you in one of the books, I really didn't know white people's blood was red until accidentally I punched one. And you know the story of that one. I didn't even punch, I just raised my hand. And that image is with me still from my primary school, junior school, never left me. And it was he who taught us. One was a guy called Cook. I forget the other teacher's name at school, who gave us great care over above the need that actually it's not all about race, there's class as well. There's people here who died in the mines. They didn't care, the English rulers didn't give a damn about the children in the north, the mining communities, the working class areas. I didn't know. How would I know? To me, white people were all powerful. It's once we began to understand that actually there are people probably as bad as we got it, in many ways, perhaps worse, because they were made to feel they were better than us. And they never knew they were worst off in many cases. They were imprisoned in their little ghettos. So there is hope here, and the hope is that the English will defeat their Englishness, because in defeating their Englishness, they will find their humanity. If Englishness defeats the humanity of England, then I think the world is doomed.
In the UK, with a so-called Labour government led by Keir Starmer, and yet you're saying about the film that you've been involved in making about the history of the struggle of black people in the UK, about Bradford 12, about the context that was involved in struggling against racism in Britain. And yet you are saying that it's very unlikely that this film will now have a showing in the UK.
No, we will wait and see, when the film is out. It's not far to go.
But what's the context you're talking about
Look,
that poses a threat?
the context, I suppose, is we were charged on terrorism in 1981 because we made bombs. And the case against us was that you can't defend yourself with petrol bombs. And we said, yes, you can. And it's our right, because that's what the fascists attacking us were doing. In short, so your readers the listeners or viewers can have a context. And in the end, we were acquitted. But we were not simply an anti-racist organization. We supported the right of Ireland for self-determination. And in fact, I nearly got a brick in my face by a uniformed soldier. It missed me, thank God. And because we were supporting the right of Ireland to resist in however it so fit now. That doesn't bode well today. We believed that the correct approach to think about what was happening in Palestine was under the slogan of death to Zionism. And that's the posters we produced. And these are the leaflets we produced. Now you can't even say from the river to the sea. They've weaponized anti-Semitism. For us, anti-Semitism was a form of racism. It needs fighting where it existed, and it existed in Bradford, and it existed in London, and it existed in Europe, not Palestine. What the hell did that have anything to do with it? So our story is not simply the story of a case. Yes, it is the story of a case. We had 44 years to look forward to in imprisonment. So it's also the story of an era where we said imperialism is wrong. We don't agree with it. We think we can build a better and more just world. Now, when you can't use the word coconut to refer to Asians sitting in parliament, i.e. brown on the outside and white on the inside, what chance have we got? Really, I hope I am wrong. We're glad to be wrong. What chance have we got to say, well, we believed then that Zionism had to be destroyed, And we believe it today. We believed then that we have a right to arm ourselves, to defend ourselves if need be, by whatever we think is appropriate, depending on the attacker. That was the case then, and that's the case today. Today, you get done for a placard, for God's sake. Liberal sort of humanistic feature of the state has gone. What's left of it will probably have gone in the next 20, 30 years. And there were, when in our time, you might have 20 fascists marching, 2,000 policemen protecting them, 10,000 of us standing against them from coming to our streets. Now it's not like that. It's 100,000 working class people, not all fascists, whipped up by far-right racism, primarily focused on Islamophobia, but also on immigration. And that's the case from America to here and right across Europe. It's not different. And in that sense, I think there are forebodings, as opposed to a conclusion. But the film will be out. The film we're getting closer every day. But we are making a film, not glorifying the 12 of us or what's left of us. Some have died, but about an era, about a process. And in that, hopefully, give a tool to those who will follow us in generations to come, that that you can take our history, whether it be in fiction, whether it be in fiction or film, and use it as a guide, as a torch, if you believe that that's the light that you need to see in the darkness, and use it. That's what our aim is.
The Second Coming is about the decline of the UK and the rise of Englishness, which we've talked about a little. What I felt was missing in that definition of English as it emerges in the novel is the continued imperial role of England. Was that something you purposely left out, or was it something that you felt would complicate things?
I mean, a lot of my writer friends, I hope they don't watch it, but if they do, it's okay. A lot of the meetings and the things got taken out. There were long, funny speeches and speeches that contextualize the world. So it's sometimes very difficult. The bourgeois writer, for the want of another thing, will like to pretend that a fiction is all about emotions and characters. It's not political, but it's just nonsense. When we name somebody, that becomes political. If it's a man or a woman, it's politics. Whatever, where they're working class, middle class, where they live, how we do it, it's all a political process. But the so-called political novel is very difficult in one sense. That if you're going to read a novel, you want to go into the realm of the suspension of disbelief. You're not reading an historical pamphlet. You're reading to escape into a world that is beyond, it's not a straightforward history book, though I did read a book about that thick on England. It was just huge. I've forgotten who it was. My sins, I read it all as well, and I kept going back to it a few times. So I suppose perhaps you can only hint at the paintwork of the economic political order. Otherwise, you lose the emotional bed on which the story must ride, because otherwise, why will you read a novel,
History is more about the future than it is about the past. And I think that's why your book is so important, because it is, in a sense, telling tomorrow's story today. And I think you do that very, very powerfully. To end, I'd just like we're at this moment where in America, you have American citizens going to vote with a choice of a genocidaire who says it nicely and one who won't say it that nicely. How do you see the situation emerging?
We often discuss this in Lebanon, watching this scenario playing out. And to us, it looked like different assholes, same shite. It really didn't matter if one was nice and one was not. So in a sense, it's an irrelevant issue, really, the change of the guard in the imperial West. It might matter to those who live there, but those who it's killing, it's an irrelevant issue. So the only question is which one brings the end of this beast. Okay. I mean, if any of my friends votes for the Democrats, then they're knowing, I have lots of American friends, then they are knowingly voting for someone who's actually carrying out the genocide right now as we speak, right this minute, on a horrendous scale that I've had a friend who's lost a cousin today. Incredible level across. So in a sense, it's a non-issue, really. You can go change your things whatever time you like. We have no choice. People of the world have no choice but to resist against this empire, this crumbling beast. Now, what difference has it made since the Labour Party came here? It's filthy, sick cesspool of Zionism. Look at them. It's not the synagogues that are burning here. It's not, you go around, it's Islamophobia that's at the rage. That's not to say anti-Semitism should be. On the contrary. But why should one pain be treated as a bigger hurt than the other? Well, that's the case because one serves their purpose. So I really don't think that it's an issue for me. Now, Trump, if he comes to power, well, what difference does it make? So they're going to drop more bombs on us. What's the difference?
So where are the sources of hope in this situation?
Sources of hope is we have a new Asia rising. We have a new Africa rising. We have a new world order being born right in front of our very eyes. Look at the emergence of the BRICS countries, notwithstanding some of the contradictions amongst them. A new world order is coming into being, and that's where hope lies. And it's always brutal, the birth of something new. It's always, always brutal. Now, it can't be stopped. We're not at 1776. They can't send gunboats up the Yangtze anymore, bombing Lebanon, which has no air defense system, setting tents alight in Gaza, which has nothing, no big achievement on a military level. It's just a brutal killing machine. And I can see a lot of hope. I think that the world will change. And I think we will have a new generation of writers and poets and storytellers who will tell the generations after us what they lived through and what they lived through and how they mustn't make the mistakes of the past.
Well, to conclude, I would like to read a little poem from a book that the Raja published recently, Palestine Whale by Yahya Labadbidi. And it's called Hope. Hope's not quite as it seems. It's slimmer than you'd think, and less steady on its feet. Sometimes it's out of breath, can hardly see ahead, and cries itself to sleep. It may not tell you all this, or the times it cheated death, but if you knew it, you'd know how hope can keep a secret.
Yes. Beautiful, really. Lovely. Beautiful. Hope can keep secrets, indeed.
So, Tariq, once again, really brilliant to speak with you. Thanks for this really interesting discussion. And I encourage everyone to get your copy of the book. And I look forward to us having further discussions about the decline world and the building of a future.
Thank you.
This is Feroz Manji, thanking you for participating in this. I look forward to speaking with you all again in the near future.